Welcome back to my React crash course lesson number 8, and in today's video I'm going to be going UseEffect. And before we get started, make sure to like this video, subscribe, comment down below if you get any questions during the video. But now, let's get started. And before I actually go over useState or how we can actually write it, I'm going to go over what it is and show you an example of why we need it. And so useState allows us to perform side effects in our components, and the most common examples would be fetching data from APIs or servers, and then also directly updating our elements here. So only updating a certain element instead of updating our whole turn here. And I'm going to show you an example of that. So if I console log render and open our console here, you can see that we're going to get our first render, which would be showing our elements when we open the page. But then if I search something in our input here, we can see that we're going to get a re-render because every time we update a hook, the whole function gets re-rendered, which means that also these elements will get re-rendered too. Now, what if we had multiple hooks? So let's say I had another hook, which would be a stopwatch. And then here we're going to write useState, and let's set that to 0. And so let's just say that this stopwatch would constantly work, or let's say that this would be the time, which would mean that it would update every minute or something like that. Let's actually make this work. So if I write set timeout, and then in here, let's run the callback function. And since we're going to be updating the stopwatch, the function gets re-rendered, which means that we don't need a constant loop here. So if I write set stopwatch, and then stopwatch plus 1, nothing's really going to happen. And let me actually console log that too. So stopwatch. Over here, we can see that every second we're going to be updating our stopwatch, but then since we're doing that, we're going to be re-rendering our whole page here, which means that if you have a lot of different elements, every time you would change a hook, your whole page would be updated, which you don't really want. And now let's go over the syntax for UseEffect. So you need to import it. So where you import useState, you can add a comma and then write UseEffect, and then we're importing that from React. And the syntax would be you write UseEffect, and then in here we would have two values. So we have a function, and then we have a dependency. Now you can actually only write a function here, so let's start with that, and let's just console log render. And so what this would do is it would basically just console log on every single render. So let's uncomment this out. And we can see that it works the exact same way because we haven't added a dependency. Now, if we have an empty dependency, so we add a comma and we have to add these square brackets, it would only run on the first render, which means that it would only run once, and we can see that we're not going to get any more console logs. And the first render would be when our elements first load. And then the third option would be when we have a value in our dependency, which means that, let's just say in this example, I would console log only when the stopwatch, so stopwatch changes, and we can see that we're going to get a re-render, but then if I search something, we don't get a render for the search. And actually should have set this to search because it's changing every single second, but we're going to get our initial render, and we can see that we don't get any console logs. But then if I search something, we can see that we're going to get a render here, which means that this UseEffect will only run when our search value changes. And so there's multiple ways to use UseEffect. So let's just say that we wanted to add 1 to our stopwatch every time we search something. So this is just an example. Here we would write search, and then we could copy this. Let's actually just comment that out again, and then paste that in here. And we can see that we're going to get our first render, which would be 1. And if we search something, so if I write ABC, this would change to 4. And so that's a very simple example, but let's just say that if this would be the display for a calculator and you wrote something like 1 plus 1, what you could do is you could add a UseEffect for that. But then if you didn't have a submit button or something similar to that, then you could use UseEffect, and then every time your display changes, you could check if you could actually get an answer for that. And if you can, then you could console log it. And that's just a very simple example. But you can do a lot of different stuff here. And so this is going to be the very basics of UseEffect, and you're not always going to need to use it because it's only specific moments where you will need to use them, and you'll know that when you get to them. But this is where I'm going to end this video, so I really hope that you liked it, and if you did, then make sure to leave a like, subscribe so you don't miss upcoming React lessons and videos, and comment down below if you get any errors or any questions, and hopefully see you in the next video.